welcome back to 27 Fox Place. I'm so glad that you could stop by today. I'm working in the kitchen, putting together ingredients and meals that I can freeze for later. And if you're like me, the start of the new year means it's time to get back on a healthy eating plan. And the problem with forming new habits is that it's all too easy to revert back to the old ones. So the only way for me to stick to my goals is to have a fridge stocked with ingredients and meals that I have prepped in advance. Whenever I work in the kitchen, I like to clean as I go, and I ran the dishwasher this morning, and I just need to empty it so that I can put the dirty dishes straight into the dishwasher, and it keeps the countertops clear so that I have more room to work. When I have the time, I enjoy cooking, but during the week, I don't always have the time and energy to spend in the kitchen, so I try to prepare as much as I can when I do have the time and energy. And I've already washed, chopped, and shopped all the produce that I need this week, so all I need to do is get cooking. It doesn't take much to dull the edge of a knife blade, and the harder the cutting surface, the faster it will dull the blade. So I only use a wood cutting board, and I try to sharpen the knives often. The soup I'm making is a puree, so I'm going to cut the onion into large chunks so that I can roast them with the carrots. And I'll add today's recipes and the links for my favorite kitchen tools in the description box, but if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I'm using an oil sprayer to coat the pan with avocado oil before I add the veggies, and I love this sprayer because I can fill it with any oil I choose and it protects the oil from oxidizing. And I like to roast the veggies because it adds more flavor to the soup, and I just set the oven at about 425 and I'll roast the veggies for about 20 to 25 minutes, and I'll start checking the carrots after about 20 minutes. I need to peel a few cloves of garlic to roast with the carrots, and I don't know how I ever lived without this garlic peeler. It takes all the work out of peeling the garlic. You just pop the clove of garlic into the tube, roll it a few times, and the peeled garlic pops right out, and it's so worth every penny. Roast garlic is another freezer staple that I like to have on hand, and I'm going to roast a few heads of garlic while the oven's hot, and I'm just going to remove the excess skin from the garlic before I chop off the top. And I'll arrange the garlic in a small casserole dish and drizzle with olive oil. The garlic will cook into a paste, and I can add it to things like soup, sauce, and chili for added flavor. It takes about 35 to 45 minutes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm going to roast a few heads of garlic while I'm roasting the carrots. And I like to roast about half a dozen heads at a time so that I can store them in the freezer. Whenever I see you. And before I start making my next soup, I'm going to peel some extra garlic so that I can have some on hand for the week. My life was great till you added colors. I need to let the carrots cool down before I add them to the blender, and this is an important step because hot foods expand and can blow the top off the blender. I like to use chicken stock instead of water to add flavor to things like rice and quinoa, and making these two staples in advance saves time later in the week.
World on fire, you set my world on fire. I don't know what I'd do without you. You make me smile, what is it that you do? My life was great till you.
White chicken chili is one of my favorites because I can make a big batch and keep it in the freezer for a rainy day, and it's a hearty meal that's easy to make, but it usually doesn't last long enough to make it to the freezer.
My world on fire, you're my heart's desire. I just wanna love you, just wanna hold you, just wanna be with you till we grow old. Just tell me you'll stay or take me away. I want you for myself.
And the recipe calls for roast garlic, but since it's not ready, I'm just going to saute a few cloves of garlic along with the onion. And the recipe calls for 3 cans of beans, and 1 can needs to be mashed into a paste before adding the remaining ingredients. And if I'm using roast garlic, I would mash the garlic along with the beans.
I don't know what it is you do. I just want you, I just need you. I don't know what it is you do. I just wanna love you, just wanna hold you, just wanna be with you till we grow old. Just tell me you'll stay or take me away. I want you for myself every single day. You set my world on fire. You set my world on fire.
And once all the ingredients are mixed together, I'll let it simmer on low for about 20 to 30 minutes.
We're in this together now.
This is a good time to stop and tidy up the kitchen before I start making the salmon patties, and I like to keep soapy water in the sink to help cut down on the dirty dishes that I have at the end. And since I have all of my storage containers in use, I'll need to wash out 1 container so that I can put the food away.
No, 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 no. I'll keep you safe, I'll give you my everything. Even if we're falling down, even if we're falling down.
Quinoa cooks in about half the time as rice, so I can put the quinoa in a storage container while it cools down.
'Cause we're in this together now. You and me together now. What's the point of living if we're scared to lose each other? What's the point of living without you? Tell me now and I'll stop fighting. Tell me now and I'll stop breathing.
I had planned to cook the salmon while the oven was hot, but I forgot to take it out of the freezer. So I'll add the salmon to a sink full of warm water, and if the water is too hot, it will start to cook the salmon. But the water speeds up the process, so the salmon should be defrosted in about 10 or 15 minutes. And while I'm waiting for the salmon to defrost, I need to saute another onion and about a pound of chopped mushrooms. But I'll cook them in separate batches so that I don't overcrowd the pan. And while that's cooking, I'll mix together the rest of the ingredients for the salmon patties.
I'll be your light, I'll keep you from darkness. Even when the sun don't shine, even when the sun don't shine. Give me your strength and show me your weakness. 'cause we're in this together now. You and me together now. What's the point of living if we're scared to lose each other? What's the point of living without you? Tell me now and I'll stop fighting. Tell me now and I'll stop breathing. I don't want to be here without you. Without you.
I like to use fresh herbs in this recipe when I can, but I only have fresh parsley today, and I cut a few sprigs from the plants that I have on the patio, and since I don't have any fresh dill, I'll just use crushed dill weed instead. Because this recipe has eggs in it, I need to wait for the onion and the mushroom to cool down so that it doesn't cook the egg. And I use the stand mixer to combine all the ingredients before I add the salmon. I've reserved a few cups of mushrooms to use later in the week, and while I'm waiting for the onions and the mushrooms to cool, I can blend up the carrot soup. And I'm just going to use the same pan to cook the salmon, and I'll use half of the salmon for the patties, and I'll use the other half for lunch this week. And I've reduced the heat in the oven to about 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'll just coat the salmon with olive oil and a little salt and pepper, and I'll bake it for about 10 to 15 minutes. And I try to slightly undercook the salmon so that it doesn't dry out when it gets reheated later. And to finish the carrot soup, I just need to add all of the ingredients to the blender, and I'll blend it on high until it's smooth and creamy. I like to store the soup in these 32-ounce mason jars, and mason jars freeze well as long as you don't overfill them. So I'll go ahead and add the mushrooms and the onions to the patty mixture so that I can clean up. And I try to multitask as much as possible when I meal prep to save time, and it would have been more efficient to cook the salmon first or even a day in advance to give it time to cool down. But I still have plenty of things to do while I'm waiting for the salmon. I'll add a little soap and water to the pan and set it aside so that it's easier to clean. Smoothie prep is one of the biggest time savers for me, and I have one of these smoothies every day, and it fills all of my daily fruit and vegetable requirements. And I add 1 cup each pineapple, celery, and cucumber to a freezer bag. And if I have a banana that needs to be frozen, I'll add 1 to the bag as well.
You know I really want you to stay later. When you then go, you will somehow time I told you the way that I felt, that I'd be lost without you and never find myself. Patience, let's do the numbers before we judge. Someday, all of this mess will only make.
For the green portion of the smoothie, I use a scale to measure out 2 ounces of kale and 2 ounces of spinach, and it works out to be about 4 cups of packed greens. And I keep the green packs in the fridge, but they can be stored in the freezer, and the greens can't be defrosted once they've been frozen, but the frozen greens will blend up well in a smoothie.
When I'm with you, the weekend never ends. It's silly, but sometimes I can feel your lips on mine. Lovers be lost, but we will stay on a solid ground. This time, it is for real in another way. Will you be my only and dearest every day? So find me at the rainbow's end.
I need to make a batch of pesto, and I am all out of pine nuts, so I'm going to use walnuts and cashews instead. And I'm not going to grate the Parmesan, I'm just going to chop up the chunks in the food processor. And then once the nuts are toasted, I can add all of the ingredients to the food processor and blend everything into a paste.
I still cannot grasp the fact that you want to be mine. Wherever we end up, I know we'll be alright.
I don't think that I'm being that selfish right now. You said yourself you'd be breaking every vow. I can understand you're tired.
Pesto is easy to make, but I can't use it all before it goes bad, so I pour the pesto into molds and freeze it, and each one is about a tablespoon. And once it's had a chance to set up in the freezer, I can pop it out of the molds and store them in a freezer-safe container.
But without us, something made us find each other out there. Made us realize we're more than just stardust. Ignore this fact if you must, to do what your dreams are telling you to do. And I'll be out there looking for someone like you. Stardust, stardust. I'm the lazy one, so I guess I should have known. You said yourself you wanna do this alone. What if your dreams are making it hard to think straight? If you still love me, I can wait, I can wait.
An easy way to clean the blender is to add a little soap and water to the pitcher and blend it on high for about a minute or so. But if you add too much soap, it will make a huge mess. And while the blender is cleaning itself, I can clean up a few other things in the kitchen.
Made us realize we're more than just stardust. Ignore this fact if you must.
I need to make sure that the blender is very clean for this next staple. Removing processed foods from our diet was a huge adjustment, and it meant I had to find alternatives that would save time and appeal to the taste buds. And I came across this recipe for a vegan sour cream that turned out to be a really great substitute. And I make a double batch, and I freeze half of it. I soak 2 cups of raw cashews in 2 cups of non-chlorinated water overnight to soften the cashews, and I blend the mixture on high until it's smooth and creamy. And the mixture should be thick but still pourable, and it will thicken once it goes into the fridge.
Find each other out there, made us realize we're more than just stardust. Ignore this fact if you must, to do what your dreams are telling you to do. And I'll be out there looking.
It's important to transfer the mixture to a glass bowl or container before adding the rest of the ingredients. And I add 1 or 2 capsules of probiotics, a pinch of salt, and then I mix it all together with a rubber spatula or a wooden spoon. And once you add the probiotics, you want to avoid contact with metal. And once the ingredients are mixed together, I'll cover it and leave it at room temperature for about 24 to 48 hours. And it's the probiotics that give the sour flavor, and the flavor becomes more tangy with time. So once the probiotics have done their thing, I can add about a tablespoon of lemon juice and store it in the fridge for about a week or so.
Ain't nobody like you, look so beautiful. And
I need to remove the skin from the salmon before I add it to the patty mixture. I'm going to store half of the salmon in the fridge, and then I will use the other half for the salmon patties.
ain't nobody like you. I could go 1,000 miles as long as I'm with you. Yeah, you're taking me high. Ain't nobody.
It's important to combine all of the ingredients before adding the salmon. I don't want to overwork the salmon and end up with a paste, so I'm using the low setting to mix the salmon into small chunks.
Tell you about the time when I first met you, listening to a favorite song, walking on the street when you caught my eye, something about the way you move. No, there ain't nobody like, there ain't nobody like. So lucky to be yours. And you're taking me high. Ain't nobody like you. I'm not coming down.
I realized that I forgot to add the mayonnaise and the mustard to the mix before I added the salmon, so I'm going to fold in these last 2 ingredients so that I don't break down the salmon anymore.
Ain't nobody like you. Ain't nobody like you. Ain't nobody like you.
This cookie scoop makes it quick and easy to make the patties. I can just scoop the mixture onto the cookie sheet, and then I'll flatten them into patties with a spatula.
Jump into the car on a Friday night. I wanna drive with you. Looking for a bar in the nearest town. I've never seen a sky so blue. And you're taking me high. Ain't nobody like you. I'm not coming down. Ain't nobody like you. I could go 1,000 miles as long as I'm with you. Yeah, you're taking me high. Ain't nobody like you. Ain't nobody.
Once the patties are ready, I can put them in the freezer until they're firm enough to store in freezer bags.
Ain't nobody like you.
And the only thing left to do now is put everything away, and I try to clean up the kitchen while I work so that things aren't too bad at the end. I put the dogs in charge of cleaning the salmon off the baking sheet, and I'm sure they did the best they could, but I'll still need to use a little barkeeper's friend to clean up what's left.
Our house, our dreams. We were dancing on a wire, reckless it seemed. We found holes in these walls. We like what we saw. Seems so strong until it falls. The final straw. Oh, I never felt like this before. When I was trying.
I let the pans soak to make them easier to clean, but baked on grease can be difficult to remove, and barkeeper's friend does a good job of removing that stubborn grease.
bound to make mistakes. Real love, we thought, but it was always on fire. Our house, our dream. We were dancing on wire, reckless it seemed. I never felt like this before. When I was trapped, you showed an open door. I had no reason to complain. I didn't have the words to explain. I never felt like this before. When I was trapped, you showed an open door. I had no reason to complain. I didn't have the words to explain. Then we were dancing on wire. Yeah, we were dancing on wire. I'm feeling low. Want you to know I ain't got much to show. Baby, I'm slow. I'm gonna creep into my eyes, snail show until the spring liberates me from my winter hell. I've got candles and candy. I can be your daddy if you only let me creep into your prison cell. Hey baby, can you tell I'm not a criminal? Your choice is seminal. I want you to stay true to what's right for you. No matter who or know what will others say. Just find your way and try to stay true. I was never the one to write up a song for just anyone. I was always the one to find myself lost in long conversations, oh. Cause I've always been told that things will unfold if you keep on waiting. But then you came along and proved me all wrong. I was so mistaken. Cause you glue all the pieces back together. Yeah, you take all my wrongs and make them better. Yeah, you're making me wanna try forever. And I feel so free, oh my sweet baby. I was never the one to give up the ghost. No, I was so stuck, I kept on playing.
On this top shelf, I have veggies that I can use in omelets or stir fries, and I have a fridge full of healthy foods to get me through the week, and I have veggies that I can roast in the oven or use in stir fry meals. And I keep leftovers and prepared foods in this drawer, and I use bell peppers for almost everything from stir fry to roast veggies and fajitas.
Yeah, you're making me wanna try forever.
Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope this video gave you the motivation to prep your fridge for the week, and be sure to hit that subscribe button before you go, and I hope to see you next time.
And I think to myself, and I'm thinking out loud, we won't need nothing else for the rest of our time. And I know it so well, I will always be by your side.